In the blockchain industry, which you're currently working in, there's a lot of trendy terminology like Metaverse, NFTs, Web 3.0, interoperability, decentralization. Can you paint a picture for people who perhaps they don't understand how everything fits together? Can you maybe explain where we are right now and maybe where we're going also?
Okay. So maybe I can start with decentralization, right? So basically, decentralization describes a different way against centralization, right? So it's basically a different way to organize and maintain a network, or maybe an organization. Let's say a network, right? So you may heard of the word distributed, right? So I would say both decentralized services network or centralized network nowadays are basically all distributed networks, which means that you don't have only one machine or one node in this network. You basically have a lot of nodes in the network. So the major difference here is whether there is one leading node in the network, or maybe several leading nodes in the network that schedules the whole network or not. Or like every node in the network is kind of equal to each other, right? So when you have some central nodes in the network, the advantages here is might be quite efficient because everything is synchronized through those kind of leading nodes, right? It's probably like in the army, right? You have generals. The generals post the orders, and the others to follow the orders, right? It becomes very efficient in some way, right? But there are many other use cases where it is very hard to find these generals, find these leading nodes, because other participants in the network are not willing to admit that someone is the leading nodes. They would think about that I could be the leading nodes if if you have to pick someone, right? So what I mean here is there might be cases where a decentralized network is more aligned with the situation, right? Apparently, decentralized networks are actually making a trade-off, right? So because there are no leading nodes in the network, then efficiency might be a thing to consider, right? But the good part is that because there is no such leading nodes or central nodes, right? So everyone will replicate the state of the network independently. Then it becomes more stable, more secure in some way, because it's hard to manipulate the network. Because in the previous case, if the leading nodes are bad, then we kind of sucked, right? But here, one or two nodes become bad will not affect the fact that there is a majority of nodes in this network. There are still reliably replicating the whole network. So it's kind of hard to say something invalid in this network. So that gives you a very different experience in setting up level applications. But I would say decentralization is the idea of organizing a network in a different way. And again, both decentralized network and centralized network are probably distributed these days, right?
Sure. So it's like if you had a small community, maybe a few hundred people, you could have it's distributed because there's not one person, there's many, and either everyone votes and everyone's vote is equal whenever you want to make a decision. So anyone can come up with an idea. I come up with an idea. Everyone votes, or we have one or two leaders and they make the decisions, right? So that would be the distributed versus the decentralized.
Yeah. Quite similar to ideas like this. And
I'm just trying to put it in like kind of simple terminology that anyone could understand.
Sure. Yeah. That would be a very valid interpretation of this kind of terminology, right? Web3 is Web3 basically is talking about web applications, the involvement of web applications, right? So
for a lot of people, I think they're probably thinking right now, Web3, what happened to Web 1, Web 2, you know?
Yeah. So I haven't heard about Web 1, Web 2, so now it's Web 3, right? Yeah, but actually what we are currently using are probably categorizing to the Web 2 section, right? So Web 2, so the terminology of Web 2 is quite related to what we have described, the decentralization concept. So basically, currently the web service are provided by some central service providers like big companies, right? Google, Facebook, Twitter, yeah, things like this. And the major difference here between Web 3 and Web 2 would be the real ownership of your data and of your, let's say, account or maybe your information, right? Because Web3 because there's no standard explanation to this problem. As far as I see it, I see Web3 as a combination of centralized and decentralized web services, which means that at some point you will like ordered or you will follow the framework controlled by some central companies. But at some other areas, you might be quite independent in those services, which means that in those areas, you can have the access to real ownership. Let's say if you have some kind of asset, you really have the ownership of that asset because you will have some cryptography, let's say, guarantee that only yourself would be able to use it, to access it, even if the service, let's say the web service, are actually storing your asset or storing your data. They're only storing your data. They would not have the access to it without your permission. That's the guarantee from the technology, right? So this is pretty much different from what you're if you're dealing with a centralized service, because you basically trust that the central service provider will be making good custody of your data and assets in a very reliable way. But if they don't, you never know, right? Maybe you know someday, but you cannot be sure about that they are doing the good thing all the time. But again, it's not like Web3 is trying to eliminate all centralized services, because that will be very hard to achieve, because centralized services, they provide a lot of very good user experience at this moment, and it's hard to imagine that Google, Facebook, and these all big players are gonna become decentralized like in one day, right?
Yeah. For someone listening, maybe a question that's relevant for them is, currently with Web 2.0, you use Facebook, they own your data, they sell it to advertisers, that's how they make their money. Instagram, they take your data, they sell it to advertisers. In Web 3.0, will people be able to use these services, and instead of the service owning their data and selling it, they can then choose, okay, I want to sell my data, and then they get paid to watch advertisements?
Yeah, sure. So because if the in a Web3 application, if the specific piece of data is monetized, then it becomes an asset of you.
Sure.
Yeah. Then you can make the decision. Yeah. You can still let them to process your data anyway, and you can still choose not to have any benefits simply because if they are dealing with your data, they would be able to offer a bigger capability here to offer you a better services, right? Sure. Because you cannot do that because you don't have the technology and resources.
We get to sign up for free, use it for free, but we pay by giving them our data.
Yeah, sure. But you can make the decision. Yeah, you can. Maybe nothing changed, but actually a lot of things changed behind, because you have the option to do one thing or the other. Yeah, and so basically this is Web3, right? And it's closely related to the concept of NFT, right? Non-fungible token, right? So basically, I see NFT as a tokenization method to wrap up something, either from the physical world or from the virtual digital world, right? So I see it as a solution to tokenize something so that they will become standard and they will be circulated in a more flexible way, right? So basically you can tokenize let's say nowadays you can tokenize a digital art, right? Paintings, very famous paintings, right? You can tokenize some very interesting, let's say, logos, things like this.
How do you tokenize something that's physical? Like if it's a JPEG or just some image online, you can very easily convert that. You put it through some system, it gives you a token ID. What about if I want to tokenize, like you said, a digital piece of, not a digital, I mean an actual piece of artwork?
Yeah, that will be much more difficult because you have to deliver the guarantee that this kind of connection is always there, right? You will not like change the physical thing to another one and still keep the token there, right? So this basically requires more than a simple tokenization process, right? So, but if you are in a digital world, you basically the simplest way to do this is to, like, for example, hash something, right? So you know that if something is got hashed, then you would have the information to decide whether it is changed or not.
Yeah, just for people listening who don't know what hashing is a one-way function. So you take an input, you put it in, you get an output, but you cannot go backwards. From the output, you cannot get back to the input.
Yeah, it's very hard to get back. And if the raw information is changed for, let's say, only one bit, then the hash will be totally different, right? So basically, you cannot provide something not as you claimed before.
Yeah, it's a way of authenticating things. So if someone claims that this is the hash of this piece of this document, a lot of people use it to check the authenticity of a document, right? If you want to download a software, you can hash the software, compare the hash to what they claim the hash is, and if it's the same, then you know it's the actual piece of software. If it's different, you know that maybe someone's changed something, someone's tampered with it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so then it might be easier, right? So the tokenization becomes easier than if you are dealing with physical items, right? And basically, if everyone is comfortable with the concept of NFT, right, and everyone is trying to accept to interface NFT with their own services and business, then NFT becomes a very standard way to circulate assets, so circulate important data, to circulate different kinds of rights, right, things like this. So I would say NFT itself is only a name, a concept, right? So basically, this is a very popular way to wrap up data together, right? But the real problem here is whether you're wrapping up meaningful data or not. So as long as I said, we have both angels and evils at the same time, right? Currently, because you have some very meaningful tokens that make sense, but still you will see a lot of tokens that basically are not that are not making any sense at the same time. So I think the real question here is about the whether you're making sense with your whether you are exploiting this kind of non-fungibility in a meaningful way, right? And metaverse would be the hardest topic for me to explain at this moment, because it actually covers, so there's no like one consensus against metaverse at this moment. I would say one of the common knowledge of metaverse is that we all know that it covers not only blockchain, it covers a lot of like virtual reality, artificial intelligence, and Internet of Things, all kinds of technologies together. So basically the core idea is actually coming from a very popular novel, like a couple of years, like I forgot that, maybe it's 20 or 30 years ago, right? And so currently when we talk about metaverse, we're basically talking about a digital connection, a digital world that connects physical world, physical items, and map them into the digital world. Now, basically, this kind of mapping, digital mapping here. But as we all know, that is not easy to enforce the mapping in a secure way, in a reliable way, right? Because when something happens in the physical world, you have to make it align with the digital world so that we'll have almost similar or same effects. That would be extremely hard, right? So basically, in current days, have been seeing a lot of people talking about metaverse, but actually they are talking about NFT, things like that. That's possible. I would say NFT might be the tool to be designed as an implementation or as a building block of the metaverse, if the real metaverse is really there, right? So NFT might be a building block of this, but does not equal to metaverse, right? I would say this. So there is a very large imagination space for metaverse at these days. I would say it's very hard to define and explain. Yeah, in very simple words. Yeah, but the real point here is about the digital mapping from the digital world and the physical world. Yeah.